All right. So I think maybe we can just dive in. Do you have the agenda, Commissioner Roy?
I'll take it if you have a printed.
I don't have. I thought she printed.
And it says cover open on the cover there, so I can try putting everything this morning and print them on the meetings.
I can forward you. Oh, you have it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I only have,
Oh, you have a few of those.
I have a few of the first page.
Of the, okay. The agenda. That's the agenda. Does anyone else need a copy of the meeting agenda?
I'll take one if you have extra one.
We have extra ones. Okay, could you send that down?
No, I have, that's this.
No, that's the issues, scope of issues. That's the agenda. All right. You're all set.
I am.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask you to just go around and introductions, but also to just say a little bit about what your goals and expectations are for this mediation process. And I know that you've all spoken to me about that, but you haven't heard each other. So just a couple minutes about what your hopes and expectations are for this mediation process. Can I turn to you first?
Sure. Usually I go last, and this is great. No, I think what I'm excited about is, and you put it right at the top of your scope of issues, which is this governance authority question and how the legislation laid it out, and what it assigns to the chair, what it assigns to the executive director, and I'm obviously hopeful, like I think everybody else is, that we find a way to resolve that tension and not just lay out our thoughts or lay out a game plan, but a game plan that will help the next chair or any future executive director. But I wanted to have some sustainability. I wanted to have some lasting power so that the introduction of new leadership are not right back here trying to address the same issue. At the same time, thinking through, responsibilities of the other four commissioners. We're all assigned to sea. We're all told we can't commit a felony. We're all told we have to live in Massachusetts. But other than that, there's really nothing in job description. So
Don't die.
And
don't die.
And don't die. So, as we look at the issues, between the responsibilities of the chair, responsibilities of the executive director, to the degree we can look at kind of a broader question of how other four commissioners fit in, how we can help, how we can work with staff. I was reflecting back on my days as a gaming commissioner. We were the first 5 employees, so we saw the whole foundation being built. We saw the whole organization being built. For the 5 of us here, we're stepping into something pre-existing, and we're still trying to get a lay of the land. So for me, trying to find a solid system of communications between commissioners and our executive director, commissioners and staff, I think is also critical if we can get to that point, because we're usually complaint box A, and I want us to be able to have, support the great work of our team by being able to have a sense of how the organization functions so that we can essentially have each other's back. I'm sure at times this commission felt like they were surrounded by everybody shooting arrows at them, and I really want to find a way to have a cooperative, functioning team that understands, not too granular, but understands to a degree what everybody's working on, everybody is doing for the benefit of the organization, and the benefit of our responsibilities. So you go first, you kind of get a long-winded rambling answer, but that's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Roy?
Thank you. First of all, I'm so grateful to be here with all of you, and I don't care how we got here to be in person. I'm just happy that we're all here in person with my esteemed colleagues. And I'm grateful for this whole mediation process because I think we're at a perfect inflection point in the agency because the first cohort, including Executive Director Collins, not only had a stand-up an industry but an agency at the same time. That's really hard work. So where are we now? We're at a perfect inflection point to hopefully eliminate any gray areas. There are a lot of gray areas, let's be honest. I'm sure we all express that. So we can eliminate any gray areas and delineate our roles a little better, I think would be really helpful. Sometimes it gets a little confusing. My colleague said, Commissioner Stephens, the communication, I think there's a little bit of some, hiccups there. And if we could help illuminate that a little better, I think that would be helpful for all of us. So I'm just excited that we're doing this. This is a legacy project that will help future generations of commissioners and staff at the agency. So thank you.
Commissioner Camargo?
Yeah.
I have actually a presentation.
I thought we might take off.
I worked on a PowerPoint.
Well, first of all, thank you for everyone agreeing to be here in public. I think it makes a big difference. I think like you, Commissioner Roy, it's exciting to see folks who've been working with each other for so long, and it's just nice. Let me just grab this from Kate. Thank you, right there. I appreciate you just in case, right? Thank you. I'm happy.
One of those boards too.
I think, I guess I'll be brief, but my goal and expectation is that we can figure out some kind of charter for all of us. We all know that this job is difficult and we have policy to create and, it's like bumper cars. So hopefully we'll figure it out. And this morning I did have a thought. And I said to myself, wow, if we work on this stuff and the next set of commissioners completely scrap it, what does that mean and what does that look like? So in thinking of like, what do we do to make sure it works for us, but that we at least find a few things that we can, weave into the DNA here for succession planning for other commissioners to come after us. Because this is one of these jobs where there's not a lot of definition, so you can kind of do, and I think that's a good thing and a difficult thing. So, and there's more, but I'll save it for later, we gotta keep going. So, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. So I'm the newest person, and Commissioner Camargo, I really appreciate your comment about what happens in the next iteration. And I'm kind of piggybacking as one does as you're further down the line on what other commissioners have said is, because I'm not so concerned about if it gets scrapped, because to me it seems like this is part of, as Commissioner Stephens and Commissioner Roy said, an evolution of this agency and the industry. And so, yes, while my feelings might be a little hurt if the next generation just scraps it and like throws a match on it, I do understand that that's just part of how things grow and develop. So I am very much looking forward to this process. I feel very blessed that I am here at a time where I can kind of see this happening and participate in it, because I do think there's so much positive energy amongst all the commissioners and the agency, and to kind of be at a stage where we're saying, okay, we're like kind of developing to the next level, like between whatever stage, however you want to describe it. It's exciting, and I think that this will be a very positive experience, and one coming out of the pandemic where we're able to sit down and work together and create something, to me will be something that, at least amongst the commissioners, will be something valuable.
Thank you.
So I've gathered you all here. Adding, I think, to a course at this point, I've lived this agency. I've poured myself into this agency for the past, what feels like a long time, but it's been about 5 years now, and we have figured it out as we've gone. And we've had to. And I think that's it's a testament to the people that are here, that there's been at the very least, a mutual commitment to just getting the work done, living through some of these collisions as they happen, living through some of these challenges and questions as to whose responsibility is this. Each and every time we figured it out, but I've often observed that sometimes we spend more time on that question than we do the question itself. What is the challenge before us? Well, whose decision is it to figure this out? Then we wrestle with that for about a week or two. And then once we figure out whose decision it is, we actually find out that we agree on the approach we should have taken the whole time. And that's been stressful. It's taken a toll, I'm sure, on the first iteration of commissioners too, in fairness to them. And it's taken a toll on me and the staff here at the agency. And I think this process is going to help figure some of that out. But I think it also sets up a mechanism by which we establish a mutual respect and kind of those engagement opportunities of how do we solve that question before it becomes a headache for someone. And to the point, Commissioner Camargo, that you made about kind of scrapping things too is, yes, that's a risk, of course. But much like the regs too, any iteration of a commission can choose to adopt or recreate policy at any time. And that's actually been one of my guiding principles of a lot of our approaches is embedding things into policy, embedding things into like SOPs even internally as an administrative side of the house. It makes someone stop and think, what is my justification for changing this? Right now, it doesn't take much because any commitment that someone made to me privately is not reduced anywhere. And I think formalizing some of this is going to show a level of intention and a level of thought and care that someone else, if they want to go in a different direction, is going to have to justify. And I look at a lot of the policies the commission, the first iteration of the commission, the first cohort, so to speak, adopted and think those are now durable policies, but they're not permanent. And that's okay. And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I just know that I come into this really open-minded, I think respectful and mindful of my role here, knowing that ultimately I work for the five of you. It's a privilege to do that. I respect you all. And I just want some clarity on what you expect from me and how I can take your policies, implement them thoughtfully, and then have the space to do that as well and make sure that I'm still openly responsive to you. And Commissioner Stebbins, you made a point about externally kind of shooting arrows at us. Historically, that's been true. And I think sometimes we've shot them at ourselves too, and that's unfortunate. But I think it's through that process of like, whose decision is this? And it's been tense at times. I'm not gonna lie about that. And I think we arrived at this moment in a very productive way, which is we've got to figure this out. So, but I appreciate that you're all willing to embark on this with me, alongside me, and are also including me in it too, because you can easily impose this, and you're not. So I appreciate that. So I guess I'll stop there because I too could go on for days.
I won't take up too much time. First off, I already said I'm really excited to see everyone and be in one space together because it's just been, we talk to each other all the time, but this is really, really different. And I think the bulk of us have now been here for over a year, but it feels like, I always say it feels like 5. It feels like 5 because you're learning so much at such a rapid speed. And I think that we all have an understanding and an appreciation for how unique this agency is and how unique our positions are. And I like this opportunity because we all come with so much understanding and knowledge. We're all really, really skilled people, really, coming from different areas and different perspectives. And the idea of us kind of coming together to move us forward in a direction that makes the most sense is really something I'm looking forward to. I think this is something a few people hit on is, what happened before. Like, this is a really good, I think Commissioner Roy, you said this inflection point right now, right? Because this is the first time it's a completely new commission. The inaugural commissioners are no longer with us. And we have an advantage in the way that we're able to operate from a position of intention and taking deliberate action now. We're not trying to create something, it's been created. We're not trying to kind of figure out regs that have to be put down before anything else can happen, it's done. So now this is a process that we're going to use to figure out, well, what works? what didn't work, where are some of our challenges, and how do we sort of come together to figure out how do we get through those challenges. So I'm looking forward to that. I think the biggest thing that I'll put a pin in it because I think it's on the agenda, we'll be talking about it. But the biggest challenge that I've had, and I think a lot of us have had, is that, we're limited in the way that we can communicate. So we don't even have the ability to talk to each other and understand sort of, what someone's priorities are or what they're working on because we are restricted. So knowing that and knowing that we have those sort of restrictions in place by law, how do we make the most out of that? How do we create less silos and how do we sort of give information in a way that helps us all to be the most productive? And, I'll just stop at that point. I'm just looking forward to it. I'm glad that this is a one-off conversation because, you'll probably learn this too. There's a lot that we should talk about, and I know that we will talk about.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Yeah, I wanted to add
So
something.
despite the challenges, like you said, Commissioner Concepcion, I am so grateful for the camaraderie that we have, despite the challenges of the communication. We really do support each other in different ways, and I'm really grateful for that. I just anecdotally, like the prior cohort, there might have been more rubs, and I'm just so thankful and grateful that we talk, one-on-one as much as we do, and that we do have this camaraderie. So that's all.
I agree. I was just gonna add, because I didn't go too much into my comments, but I wanted to just add that my comment around the scrapping, just so that you guys know where I'm coming from as well, is there's some stuff that we can scrap when you're building, but there's other stuff that will stay within the DNA and the culture of the commission. And I think for me, it's like this morning I had that thought of wow, we'll go through this whole process and maybe 5 new commissioners come and scrap it. I'm competitive and, and I'm here, so I want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can for the commission. So, I see it as, I know that some of this stuff will be embedded. I hope, my expectation is that some of the work that we do here will be embedded into the new culture that's been forming at the CCC. Regardless of them scrapping, we can scrap some of the regs, but the other ones are still there because they're so great, right? So I guess that's
an example too.
Yeah, so so that's where I was just thinking. I'm like, what can we do to make sure that the new culture that's creeping upon us at the CCC, stays. So that's my big expectation. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Sorry, Kate just reached out. Is anyone else ordering before she puts this in? No.
Do you need cash or credit card or how is she?
I don't know. She just said sell her your order, but she's just saying if anyone, just send her a message if you are.
Okay.
Sorry, Susan.
Okay. That's fine. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'm really glad to be here with all of you and also to just watch you be together. Because in my conversations with each of you individually, I could feel the longing among you to be sitting in the room together. So I'm glad we're at this day. So I'm going to just say a little bit about what public policy mediation is. This isn't a lecture, it's an interactive presentation. So please, if you have a question, if you have a comment, just call it out. And we'll see where you go. Okay. So what is public policy mediation? I define it as a process that draws on the collective wisdom of a diverse group of people to solve a shared public problem. So simply bring together people with different thoughts and ideas and perspectives and help them access the wisdom that they have in order to get the solution that they need. And so the goal is an actionable and sustainable agreement, and that fits with what many of you have said about wanting whatever comes out of this process to be a long-term way of doing business. And I think you'll see, as the way I describe the process, that that's what we're shooting for. Okay. So there are some premises to public policy mediation, and this fits exactly with what you were saying, Commissioner Concepcion. People who live a situation or conflict have knowledge and wisdom to contribute to the solution to the conflict. So I come in here from the outside, I learn from you from some conversations, but you've been living the situation. You know things that are intimately known to you that I can never know. And an example that I give is
I was doing a project up in Maine on Casco Bay, and I was told about the federal government had flown over Casco Bay to map wetlands. And they developed maps of the wetlands, and the clammers said to me, if they had asked us, we would have been able to really tell them where more wetlands were, because they came during a certain point in the tides, and you couldn't see all the wetlands because of the tides. So for me, that was the people who were on the ground, literally with their hands in their mud, have a lot more information than just kind of the flyovers. And that's how I situate myself in a public policy case, which is to say, you all know the situation, and my job is to draw out from you that information and to help you frame it and package it and break it down so that you can all communicate that wisdom to each other. That's how I see my role. The second piece is that people directly affected by a conflict or a situation hold assumptions that are embedded in their perspectives. And we know we live in a time where people take in affirming information. We take in information that affirms the bubble that we live in, which also constrains us, right? So again, my job is to help you surface those assumptions in order to open up opportunities for new ideas to emerge, for you to innovate new thinking around how to solve the situations that you find yourself in. So that's kind of your job and my job on that slide. Any questions about that? Does it make sense? Feel comfortable? Yeah? All right, so now I want to just take a minute to illustrate that second point. Okay, so here's an image. I call it habitual thought patterns. Can you just say what you see in this image? What does it look like to you?
A Hershey chocolate bar.
I didn't say crown molding.
Garage door.
Garage door, yeah, I've heard that.
Tin ceiling.
Okay, but essentially squares and lines and bars, right?
There's some, they look the same, but they're not.
It's very, very,
True. Each box is different.
Does anybody see any circles? Anybody see circles? I take my cursor and go around this edge.
Oh, wow.
Do you see the circle?
Oh, wow, I did it
All right.
before.
So this is an optical illusion.
There you go. Here it is with the circles. Can you see the circles?
Yeah.
Now you see it without any help?
It's crazy. It's like you blink your eye and you can see it, and then you blink again and you can't.
So what I love about this image, and the reason why I like to show it, is to say there's a lot in front of our eyes that we don't see, right? So we think we know, but if we open up our minds and hear what other people are saying, we can see things that we didn't know. We can see each other's circles that we didn't know. So that's what I'm hoping we'll be able to do throughout this process, is to open our habitual thought patterns, to go beyond our routine constructs, to hear each other, and to see each other's circles. Okay, so now I'm going to just move to the components of public policy mediation, and I'm going to speak to each of those as well. I'm looking at the time, and I think I'm going to slightly adjust the agenda. I was going to go through all of this and then go back through them, but what I'm going to do is smush the agenda so that as I'm talking through each, we're going to have a conversation about how to apply each component. Okay, so the assessment, let me just read these and then I'm going to go to each of them. So there's an assessment, that's the interviews. There's a process design, and one of my deliverables is to work with you to develop a process design work plan, which I will bring a draft to you, and then that will be part of the subject of our next meeting so that I've got all of your input into it. There will be mediated negotiations, or we could call these mediated deliberations, where we're actually going through the substance of issues. We'll talk about whether or not there's a need for outreach and consultations, and again, all with the goal, so everything is moving us toward an actionable and sustainable agreement. And that means that we plant the seeds of implementation in the agreement by the process that we use to develop it. All right. So assessment. So I always like this Jackson Pollock painting or any of his strip paintings, because I think of a public policy mediation situation as kind of chaos, right? So it feels like chaos when you start. I feel like I dive into a Jackson Pollock painting and kind of have to find my way and make sense of the complexity and work with the parties to make sense of the complexity. So the assessment is the interviews that I've been doing with all of you, and I've got the rest scheduled with the leadership team, with Sean's leadership team. And it's really to make sense of the complexity. So what's the situational history? For example, a lot of you said this was a startup and now it's time to mature the agency. So that's part of the situational history. There's also been history of tensions and sort of who's the decision maker, what's the purview of the chair versus the executive director. So that's some of the situational history that's helpful to make clear. Who are the parties and stakeholders? That's all of you. We may have some conversations about other stakeholders. What are the issues? And I've given you a very draft scope of issues, and we'll talk through those. What are the interests? Who wants what and how? What are the tensions and conflict dynamics? And what's the social infrastructure? And that is what's healthy in the organization that we can build on, right? So there's a lot of goodwill among you. I find all of you very dynamic, energetic, committed. Sometimes there's indifference, and that's a lot harder for a mediator because you ask a question and you get kind of, you have to like try and stick pins in them to get some energy, but you're all so engaged. So that's good news for us. That's part of our healthy social infrastructure. So that's kind of what these interviews are for me. I've given you the draft of the scope of issues. Once I finish all of the interviews, I'll give you kind of a report out of the dynamics that I was seeing, just to situate us. Okay. Any questions about the assessment? Okay. So there's the process design, and that is kind of the architecture of how we'll meet and how we'll describe the issues, how we'll bring others into the process if we need to. We'll do more of that. So process design will include the components of mediation. And I'm going to go through each of these, and we're going to talk about each of these. So there's the process results, ground rules, mediated negotiations, trusted information, and outreach and consultations. And now we're going to talk about each of those. So process results, what's the product? So some of you have talked about a charter. Can we have some conversation? Is that what everyone thinks that our written outcome to this process is? And people who have said a charter, can you say a little bit about what that means and what you're imagining it to be?
Sean sold me the idea.
Me too.
Tell us what you're thinking, Sean.
Well,
Suggested the idea.
yeah,
I
no,
think you've talked about it a little bit.
I think a charter makes the most sense as a governing document that as drafted too. Because I think a lot of us can sit here and say, yep, that makes sense, I agree to that. But then a next commissioner can come in, another executive director can come in and say, I never agreed to that. So I think if it's a document, and also I'd want to be clear too, we're sitting in executive session in pursuit of something that the commission needs to therefore consider at some point. But I also think once we write it down, and writing it down allows us to then reflect and say, that is either consistent with what I understood the agreement to be, or wait a minute, that's not exactly how I said that, or that's not exactly how I interpreted that. It then also becomes something to rely upon. And then becomes documented policy of the commission where you all, as well as myself, and I guess I would want to hold myself accountable to that, to say, I agree to do the following, and you mutually agree to do something different, and I think it puts us on literally the same page. And so I do think there's value in a charter. It also identifies roles and responsibilities very clearly. And I think Commissioner Stebbins touched on, like, what is the role of a commissioner? And settling that in an expectation, I think, in a document will be valuable. It also brings that durability. It outlives all of us. And if someone wants to change it, they actually have to go in and change the actual orders. In a deliberate process. I think there's real value and utility to that as well.
And also, in addition to the charter, some kind of job description. It doesn't need to be like job description, but an idea on what it is that we are supposed to be doing as commissioners. You know, are there things we should be kind of drilling down further on? I will say it kind of having transitioned into this role most recently, you know, a lot of orientation is self-directed. Okay, well, I'm in this role, I should probably read the statute and the regs.
Right.
But is there like a particular area that I should be focused on? And then certainly because there's a treasurer and a clerk for the secretary for the commission, you know, what are those people supposed to be doing? And I guess for example, one of the nonprofits that I'm on their board, there is a treasurer identified in their bylaws, but historically, while yes, there has been a treasurer, that person is never, and the person who's been in the role for quite a while, it's never really been clear on what they're supposed to be doing. And then if you look at the statutes in Massachusetts governing what it means to be a treasurer of a board, you're supposed to be meeting with staff on a regular basis and doing a lot more. So to the extent that we have something like that, I think that would be very helpful.
I think taking it even a step further, you brought up something now, you know, we just had a situation with the chair and we didn't know what was going to happen. So it's like putting a process in place that if for whatever reason we are without, how do we operate? What do we do? What does that look like? Because clearly we need something there. I was just adding on top of that. So it's just like, that's on top of sort of the responsibility.
Plan.
Exactly.
Yeah, we don't have that
Exactly.
necessarily.
I think that the word charter, and you know, Sean, I mean, not that you sold it to us, but like you gave us that example, right, from other places, other cities, other towns. I've been on nonprofit boards before, and I'm thinking now the charter that we've developed per committee, like the fundraising committee, the marketing committee, and it was helpful because it allowed us to recruit the right people, and then also for them to understand, you know, what your role is, even though there's still more to do. Right, so that's how I kind of see it, and it's always document that you can kind of keep adding to. But we're calling it charter. I think it's a huge start to what we have right now, which is nothing.
And speaking of the charter approach too, is that I don't ever expect it and shouldn't, frankly, anticipate each and every scenario that we're going to encounter.
Right.
But it should develop a mechanism and a mutual agreement on this is how we're going to tackle issues when they do come up.
Exactly.
Because otherwise it becomes an ad hoc approach depending upon.
It kind of is
the
now.
situation. That's how it's been
Exactly.
historically.
Yeah.
And what it's caused, and that's why I made the comment I did earlier about, I often spend more time figuring out whose decision is this than I do on the actual decision itself.
Right.
And so it's a time suck in a lot of ways. But it's also, it depends on the individuals involved, and that there is no guarantee that deep into the future of this agency, there will not be a contentious relationship amongst peers and amongst colleagues. And I think Commissioner Roy, you made the point, there is goodwill here. I think we should leverage that now to put in place a documented respect. And I think it's respect for roles. And I think I need to respect your roles, obviously, as commissioners and my supervisors. But then also, what is my job and what do you expect from me? And when a situation arises, how do we come together and figure out what we're gonna do?
It's gonna allow us to argue healthier arguments. Because right now it's like, who's gonna say no? Sean kind of will say no to us. The chair could say, bad idea, but there isn't really a, you know, and I think staff could say, or folks on the outside and even internally, it's like, oh, you're a commissioner, you can do anything you want. That's a quote unquote, you know, from the outside world and the internal world, right? So I think that will be helpful, even for staff to understand that we can't do what we want. I can't just call the staff and say, hey, I want you to work on this project with me tomorrow. There's a process, you know? So I think that's part of the culture itself in terms of the charter.
But I don't know what the process is.
That's part of the problem too.
I don't know what the
is
process
There is
is.
a process, but then
I don't know what it is.
not everybody knows a process, or the process ends up being different based on
Yeah.
the topic itself.
Yeah,
and-
Exactly.
Or we do have a process, and then sometimes we forget that we have a process.
Right.
And that, if there was just something to reference to say, we all agreed,
Yeah.
I'm gonna stick to this end of the bargain, or if I don't, then I think the commission gets to hold me accountable by saying, we agreed, and you aren't following it. And I think in the past, I've observed that there's been this looming presence of the commission meets in public and uses an agenda. And so oftentimes, and I think it was on the scope of issues that I reviewed, it was essentially like emergency situations, what happens then? And it was, well, this was a COVID situation, so I took action. And not to, I don't want to cite too many specific examples just yet, but it was, well, I don't like how you handled that, so I'm going to put it on the agenda. Or you should do it because we all agree it should be done, so therefore just go ahead and do it. That's not clear authority for me. That's essentially a direction that if I agree with you, you can do it. If I don't, it's on the agenda, so we can disagree with you formally. And I still therefore don't know what my job is. I guess my job is to find agreement, and then I can do it. But if I don't find universal agreement, then it's on an agenda, we're going to debate it. But what's that process? And I think we can start to build that up.
And just to add on, Kim, you brought up something, we don't, at least I know, I'll speak for myself, I don't even realize that there is a process until like I run into it.
Exactly.
And then, you know, it's like, okay,
Like
like.
I get my hand slapped. This process, it's like,
Well.
no.
I mean, now I know, thank God, and we talk a lot and like, we walk through this, but I know that, you know, that wasn't something that was like readily understood, and I don't know if that's communicated amongst all of us either.
And I
So
think
is
that's
there-
go ahead,
Yeah,
sorry.
I was just, so it sounds like there's general sense of agreement that we're working towards a charter
Yeah.
and possibly also a commissioner job description, which may be separate from the charter, but may be embedded in it. But those are the two pieces that I'm hearing. Is that, yeah.
If I may, Commissioner Stubbins.
Yeah.
I always call you the professional commissioner.
Dr. Warner.
So talk to us. You've sat on other commissions that are different, obviously, but perspective.
No, I would say we're on the right track. This top issue, this governance authority, legislative language about the chair, legislative language about the executive director. We ran into some issues with this in gaming, but it was really about like who controlled investigations and enforcement. So it was really specific. We had a chair who had sat in chair roles before, either be it a nonprofit or another entity. But there was a rub on some legislative language that we had to sit down and have a conversation about. We had to sit down and figure out how to engage the executive director. We had to sit down and figure out when we wanted to pose an idea to the executive director. Was that our starting point? You know, and then to your point, it kind of spilled over into, well, it should be in a public meeting discussion and it's kind of, I love the idea of a document. I love the idea of something that we vote on, because the group that we haven't really mentioned a lot at this table is staff. We got to give some, and it goes beyond the executive director, but helping create a roadmap or a playbook for the staff to understand how their engagements with commissioners are supposed to happen. We got to, you know, every time we flip over the apple cart, that causes stress, that causes a little bit of panic or anxiety for the staff that we're working with. So, so building a charter, building job descriptions, again, it's being a regulator. It almost is you want to offer as much predictability as possible.
I can piggyback on that. sentiment. So what would be helpful is identifying channels of communication. So I don't have a clear understanding if everything goes through Sean, or we go directly to department heads, or do we go to project coordinators who then coordinate with their department head, anybody else in that department? Like, do I go to Rebecca Quake if I need an appointment with Yao and some members of his team, like, to identify a clear, or have an organizational chart? I don't even know every position here, like to have an organizational chart would be very helpful, and to identify the best practices for communication. So we're all on the same page, and to your point, so the staff, it takes any angst away from all of us, actually. So that would be helpful to identify that.
So as the discussions of the charter move forward, you may create something for that, right? If it's not here, you know, one of the thoughts that I had in speaking with so many people is some kind of commissioner liaison, where their job is to take what your needs are and handle them, and when they can't handle them, take them to Sean. But that's further down the line. So we're kind of circling around. It sounds like a charter and job descriptions. That's what our goal, our written goal is going to be. We'll talk about all of those issues in the context of that. I want to bring us to just this idea of a complementary goal, because that has a lot to do with the design. And the complementary goal is what makes the product more sustainable. So what will make the charter more sustainable? And I'll give you an example because it's kind of an abstract concept. So when I worked on a city charter in the city of Chelsea, when Chelsea was in receivership, the first receiver hired a consultant for $10,000 to write a new charter for the city, because that was part of the receiver legislation. When Harry Spence became the second commissioner, he threw it out. He said, this doesn't get us anywhere. I need the people in the city, the residents of the city, to understand self-governance and to protect against future corruption. So he hired me to help the city residents develop a new city charter, but the complementary goal was to teach self-governance as they were writing the charter. So that's what a complementary goal is. What has to happen during the process, and it winds up being integrated into the process design so that the product, the charter, is more sustainable and actionable. And so some things that we might think of, I hear a lot about relationship building. I think Commissioner Roy, what you just said is somehow there needs to be staff integration into understanding what comes out of these discussions. So those might be complementary goals. And so if you tell me, if we have that conversation and you say these are the complementary goals, when I sit down to draft a design to bring to you, it will have some suggestions about how to do those things.
I think too, Commissioner Roy, to your comment, I think also, we do have organizational charts, right? So I think if we go back to our onboarding stuff, because it's been a while, I think if you go back, and I do this once in a while, because sometimes I hear what you're saying. If you go back into our onboarding documents, you'll see a lot of that information, but I think it came to us so fast, and then we jumped into this role that you forget. And then I think, let's just be honest here, whether this is getting recorded or not, right? But I think we go through processes and we hit a wall, and then we're like, oh, I don't know what to do, right? But I think there's these sort of also unhidden rules that we follow, and sometimes we don't, right? So the hand on the slab situation, like, I've gotten slapped a couple of times, but I don't want
For
to.
the record, she's not.
It's metaphorically speaking.
I don't want to, right? Therefore, at the end of the day, the person who's in charge of this organization is Sean.
Right.
You know, so for me, it's like, let's just go to Sean before I burn a building down, right? So I think just a reminder, because some of that stuff, I think to give credit to the onboarding team that kind of onboarded us, that stuff was definitely in place. So I think it's just a reminder to kind of go back and look at it, reflect, take the time, and then say, hey, I don't understand this. Like, I have a dirty laundry list for Sean all the time. It's like, Sean, explain this to me. You know, it's kind of like he's always training us. At least for me, that's why I need to give him a hug today. you know?
Well, with information, like Sean
With
is
information,
definitely like, yeah.
So, you know, I just say that because I think it's important, you
Yeah,
know?
and just a question on the chart, when's the last time it's been updated? Because we've added different positions, like how
Yeah.
current is the document? Is it stale at this
We
point?
can get
What-
One on the internet that should be as up to date.
Up to date as possible?
I mean, we
Okay.
just onboarded someone Tuesday.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that may not be incorporated, but it's available. And I think, but and this happens with staff as well, where staff don't know who to go to in other departments. So
Yeah.
navigating this agency is tough. And this isn't an excuse as much as it might be an explanation too, is more than 40% of our staff has been onboarded during COVID.
Yeah,
So when staff don't know who their peers and colleagues are, that's a big factor as to why.
huge.
It's a name in Teams, it's not a person you recognize. It's also not a person you wander by.
I
And
know,
So
right.
just having Freya come in is like, okay, I've seen her maybe a handful of times.
I know.
Yeah, just to Sean, who is she? Like she's at our IT
No, I know.
team,
Yeah, yeah.
you
But I
know,
think-
but not to.
Yeah.
That's okay, I'm gonna try and take us back in terms of a complementary goal. Are there any things that come to mind?
I mean, it's something, I don't know if this is complimentary, so I guess I'll put out there, is revisiting these periodically.
Revisiting the charter, yeah.
Yeah,
So that'll be an issue in the charter, because we'll embed in the charter how that review and revision can happen. Yeah. The complementary goal is kind of what helps to just grease the wheels of implementing the charter in this case. It sounds to me it's about relationship building and connection maybe between the commissioners and the staff, clarifying connection between commissioners and staff.
Or really creating a connection with a lot of the
Yeah,
staff. I think that
you're
we're
right.
seen as like this floating body that is not necessarily connected with the staff.
I think that's a good way of putting it. There's definitely like a looming energy to commissioners, and I think some of it is, it's mutual in some ways, as far as I think staff are reticent or hesitant to go and engage a commissioner directly. And some of that is historic. There has been a culture shift that, in fact, that coincides with the arrival of I refer to commissioners now as cohorts, right? Just as through my lifespan. The original cohort of commissioners was there was a strong divide, not divide, there was a bright line of no access, limited access. That is a shift that with the arrival of the new cohort of commissioners, I've been working really diligently, I think, to say, you can talk to commissioners. I don't mind, but also I don't want to be involved in every conversation. I don't have the capacity for that. So now there's this willingness to engage, but it's not universal. And I don't know that it's written down anywhere. It's like, here's your hall pass, you can go talk to a commissioner.
Also, the pandemic hasn't allowed us to do that, right?
Yeah.
That's true.
So, but, I mean,
I also think there's some residual energy from that before too.
Absolutely.
Even though we're
Yeah,
a new
you're right.
group, it's still, I'm just saying.
It's
No.
still,
Yeah.
it's a thing.
It's a culture, so like a culture was
Thing, yeah.
set, and we kind of brought in a new culture, if you will, but there's still some residual of that left, of the old culture. And do staff know, like, they can contact us? So does everybody know, like, that they're able, are they able to, like, they can directly, and their department heads won't be upset if they directly contact us? Is that the new culture? I don't
And that's,
know.
I guess, how many times can you say something for someone to truly believe it too? Like, I think there's like, again, here's your hall pass, here's your permission slip, you can go talk to a commissioner. Is this a test? Can I? And then I think what becomes of it is that can overcorrect itself now, where it's
Too much.
I'm retreating to a commissioner
Right.
because I'm doing something I shouldn't have done, but this commissioner will protect me.
Yeah.
So let me now retreat and find coverage in this commissioner, or I'm engaging in this project with a commissioner, I didn't tell anybody, but I therefore missed a deliverable on something that I was expecting, that was scheduled for a public meeting, and so now I have to go, what's going on here? Oh, well, this commissioner came to me and asked me to do this thing.
So it's a fine line.
See, that's my point,
Absolutely.
we don't know the,
Yes.
Yeah.
so is it a process?
I'm getting it, and so we'll get to what I call outreach and consultation, and we may be able to build into the process mechanisms for this process for commissioner and staff interaction to get some feedback on elements of the charter. So we can start to model where that line is and what makes sense.
So for me personally, I interact with the same staff, like the same handful of staff. It doesn't really go beyond that. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or like like comms, we interact with them a ton, right? Like Mary Alice, Tara, and I don't really interact with investigators or so is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, maybe that.
So can I just say, one of the things that I heard a lot about is the different seats that you are appointed into. And so that's another thing that we can clarify in the charter, because that may connect to which staff should you be having more interaction with, right? So that sounds like a good issue to clarify within the charter as well.
I don't know if this falls in the category of complementary goal, but I think you touched on it as far as we do have a very engaged staff, and I think they're energized as well. And them feeling a level of involvement in this process is going to be, I think, very valuable and critical, frankly, for adoption.
Yeah.
And we can't impose this, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I would have zero success in saying, here's a charter, live by it. They want to be involved.
Okay.
I think, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think the one thing, I want to make sure that we're also empowering, whether it's you or the next person, and their authority in your role too, and that staff understand that as well. Because I think this is what I've taken from our conversations and my conversations with staff, is I can see that being sort of a friction point for your role and being able to be as effective as you can be because of that sort of strain. And I think that strain existed before with the former chair about who had authority, who can tell people to do what, and I'm so-and-so, so Sean does not have the same voice or authority too. So I think and I think I hope I brought this up already, but that's another important thing, to make sure that we as commissioners are given and empowering our executive director as well, and that's understood by the staff.
Definitely, yeah. This is a big one, and it's a big pin. I don't think we're gonna solve it today, but I think that, I don't know how we're going to, but I think it's the cohort 1.
Sure.
And the startup phase.
Yeah.
Just brought a lot of stuff that we are now trying to, it was like a back, I'm not gonna say that, scratch that, Sabio. It was a complicated relationship that has left a lot of residue at the agency that then we've had to come in and recreate with, I think, Kim, to your point, with sometimes, not knowing, but there still has been some kind of, I would say, rules and regulations that we've put in place and that I think Sean has put in place for us that we're following right now. But I don't think, and you've said it so many times to staff, but I don't think staff really understands yet, and we don't understand yet, how to interact with each other. Period in the story. People are so intimidated by us. People are so afraid sometimes. And I know that if we reach out to somebody, I'm just gonna say from my experience, I know that we reach out to somebody, they're gonna go right to their director and tell them, because that's what they're supposed to do, that's the culture, that's okay, but if that's what we're gonna do, then let's make sure that everybody understands that. So I worked for Governor Patrick. There was probably 3 or 4 people before I got to Governor Patrick. But I could also just get to Governor Patrick if I needed to. But I chose to go, let me get to these 3 people before I get to Governor Patrick. So, but there's also the unhidden rules, right? So I just think that with this cohort 2, we've never had those conversations. With staff, with us, everything's been so secret squirrel because we're in the pandemic and it's just how it is. And Sean, you've done an amazing job, but this is really hard. It's very difficult. And this is the next phase of this cohort. So it's like to no one's fault, it's just a dynamics of it.
Right, I think it sounds to me what you're describing is a system got created.
Yes.
Part of which may have had some consciousness to it, and part of it just happened. And now you're bumping up against the system, some of which is articulated and some of which is not.
Yeah.
And you're wanting to change that system.
Yeah.
And we all know when you bump, I mean, the good news is this system is only 5 years old.
Right.
And still has fluidity to evolve. Because we know when you bump up against systems, they hit back, right? They don't want to change. But so this has the fluidity to be able to shift from.
It's CCC politics. I mean, you came from a place where you worked for the treasurer, right? Like, we've all worked in these dynamics in state government, and I'm just gonna add, a lot of folks who work here have come from state government. They also have an institutionalized culture where, hey, I can't just go to the Secretary of State. I gotta go through his chief of staff, his policy advisor, and X, Y, and Z before I get here. So it's also institutional. So.
And to your point, a lot of us did work in chain of command environment.
Oh, there you go.
Right, that's what I came from, a chain, very,
That's a
very,
good way
very
to say
chain
it.
of
Chain
command
of command.
environment. I don't know necessarily is this a chain of command environment? I don't know that. And if you asked us all to write down the best way to interact with staff, to start a project, you get a different answer from all of us. Because there's no set policy on that. And Sean, you've done an amazing job, and it's nobody's fault. It's just, the pandemic hasn't helped. If we were all here, I'm sure there'd be a better system in place, but we're not. It's the reality of it. So a lot of this too is like pandemic driven, like in the world of virtual, like how do we navigate it better?
At least at the senior staff level too, I think what I'd ask all of you to be reminded of or keep in mind is we're all the first occupants. We lived through cohort 1 and we're now living into cohort 2. And so there's a shift there
Right.
as well.
That's
And
true.
in the scenarios that the reason it was such a sharp approach the first time around was, I think the Commissioner Stebbins, you made this point, much like gaming, the first commissioners were the very first employees. So they were in every single, there was no project charter. There was no assigned staff to a task. They were the ones doing the task. So eventually there was a bit of prying stuff away, which created that, this is my project, this is mine, I write these regs. No, we have a general counsel now. The general counsel is responsible for regs. The general counsel can take the regs that I write and plug them into the overall draft. So that became this, it was literally ripping it sometimes, and that created a bit of a tension. But there were scenarios too where I'm realizing, kind of recalling where some of these, again, you can't engage directly with the commissioner, was I'd be sitting in a conference room waiting for a meeting to start and the staff member's not there. I said, where are they? They're in the field with a commissioner. And then so now they're skipping out on things, and I would go to the commissioner and say, what happened here? Oh, I invited them to come along with me to this meeting. No one asked me. The staff member's now in a position of, do I skip Sean? Do I skip the commissioner?
Right, that's not fair. That's
What do I do?
Yeah.
And
It's more important.
but here I am coming down on the staff member because I can't come down on the commissioner.
Yeah.
Except for saying, please don't do that again.
But you can come down to commissioner.
Yeah.
But I couldn't.
Not in that cohort.
That's what I'm getting at. There is a,
Different dynamic.
Is it-
I hate to call it a PTSD, but there's definitely a past.
Yeah.
And I think also it is a respect of, I don't know, and also I really can't come down on the staff member either because they were in an impossible situation.
Yeah.
All I can ask for in that situation, and all I do ask for even now, is tell me.
But that's a pin right
I
there.
can mitigate.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a major
I can
pin.
reschedule my meeting, or I can approach either one of you, any one of you, and say, we have a problem here. How can I solve this? How can we solve this?
Commissioner Concepcion said earlier, sorry, Susan.
Yeah, I'm going to move us on because we're going to have a really thorough conversation of each of these issues.
I will put it in my notes.
That's okay. Because I want to get us to our process so that we can dive in. Ground rules is another component of public policy mediation processes. They are meant to govern the mediation process and create a shared expectations of the process. It becomes, so let me go to the key elements. We'll say what our mission is, what the roles and responsibilities of you are to the process, what my role is. We'll talk about a decision rule, whether you want to work by consensus or if you want to work by majority or supermajority.
I'll come back to you with a draft set of ground rules that will be kind of a byproduct of multiple past cases that I think make sense for you, but we'll walk through them and get them to agreement so that it just basically clarifies what we're trying to do and how we're going to do it. So this is what, once we get our ground rules and we develop our clear list of scope of issues, what we'll do is we'll start doing what you just started doing, is to workshop the issues, to deconstruct the issues. What are the confusions? What are value differences? And what are the real interests that can be negotiated? So that will be our first pass. We're not going to be trying to write the charter at the first time we touch an issue. We're going to try and deconstruct it. Again, to clarify, what are conflicts of confusion? What are conflicts of values? What are conflicts of interest? Conflicts of confusion, you just clarify. People use different words to mean different things. Just an example, I was doing a project on worker safety standards for construction cranes. I had these two guys that were almost at each other's throats, arguing about whether a crane on a flotation device needed to be held down or if it could move. And I had one guy who was using just sort of a small boat and another who was using an aircraft carrier, right? And he's like, I put cranes to move things on the aircraft carrier. You can't tie down the crane. They were really at each other's throats, and I said, hang on. I think we all want the crane to stay on whatever flotation device. So let's just figure out how to do that in these different contexts. And so that was just a confusion. One didn't want the crane in the water, and one want them to not be in the water. It was just confusion. So we'll find that. People use different words, have different perspectives. Well, in all honesty, I find that a majority of issues are a lot of confusion. Then we'll find that there'll be some conflicts of values, and people will have different values, and you don't negotiate values, but we'll give people an opportunity to say what it is, what represents their value, and we'll learn to respect differences in values if those emerge. And you don't need people to have the same values to reach agreements on a set of issues. And then there'll be the conflicts of interest where people really want things to be done differently. And that's where we'll have our deliberations and negotiations to come to some agreement. As we're talking, I'll be saying I hear an agreement in concept, like I kind of heard everyone saying we want a charter and job descriptions, right? That's sort of an agreement in concept. And I'll start to draft that. That's an easy one because it's just a couple of words, but when I start to think there are agreements in concept, I'll write them, and there will be a big difference between what you thought the agreement in concept was and what it looks like in writing. And I always say before I send out a draft, we're going to change this, we're going to revise it, we're going to revise it, and we're going to revise it some more until it's right. And I know there's going to be a disparity between what you thought the agreement in concept was and what it looks like on paper. And inevitably, I hit send, and 2 minutes later, I get a call from someone who's really upset. That's not what I agreed to, but we'll get there. So essentially, we'll go over these issues. And what I tend to do is, once the conversation gets repetitive on an issue, I'll say, let's table that for another time because there's no new thinking happening. And then we'll come back to it later, and I may have conversations offline with people. You may have conversations offline about an issue, and then we'll come back to it. So don't worry if there's an issue that's really important to you, and I say, you know what, it's sounding repetitive. Let's set that aside for now. We'll come back to it. We're going to go through every issue before we reach our final closure. So I've got that graphic to just show you that it's really an iterative process. We'll just go around and around until we get tentative agreements on all of the issues. And then we'll go through the document one more time to clean up anything that's conflicting with itself. And then hopefully reach final consensus and call it a done project. Let me just, any questions about what that's going to look like? Trusted information is another component, like often information is needed to support negotiations. I think for us, it won't be hard to find trusted sources, but you can imagine in a situation with a community and a polluting company that you would have a lot of difficulties finding trusted sources of information. Commission Chair Kim sent me, I think this could be a helpful piece of information. This is the Pension Reserves Investment Management Board charters. I think it's really interesting. I think yours will be different, but it gives you just kind of, here's the kind of thing that we may be working towards. So if you think this is a trusted information source, I can get this to all of you. And it sort of gives you a sense of, what does a charter look like? What can be in a charter? Again, ours will have a lot of different things, but there may be points where something's confusing and we may try to call on, for example, the chief personnel officer to give us some information. If you all agree that's a good idea. Or we may need an outside expert. Just want to put a pin in the idea of finding trusted information. And I think there are also some job descriptions that you sent me, so I'll send those out as well. Is that agreement among everyone? Everyone wants to see those? Okay, and that's the way I'm gonna be, is everyone okay with that? That's the way we're gonna work. Now let's talk about outreach and consultation.
Do you mind if I just jump in? So the PRIM charter and the job descriptions, they're all public records, so don't feel like you have to guard them like you're like, so.
Okay. Outreach and consultation. Are we needing a break or everyone okay to keep going? Keep going? All right, because I just have a couple more slides and then we can take a break after that. So outreach and consultation is really who must participate in addition to the principals. You all are the principals, right? And so Sean, I think I heard you say we can't just dump this on the staff. So this is a question, and how does the staff get engaged in this process? Because it's a process. These are the mediated negotiations. Part of the process is outreach and consultation. And this is two-way feedback, right? The reason why I say it's two-way feedback is because you may develop a proposal and we want to get some feedback on the proposal. At the same time, you may want to explain to people limitations and why the proposal came out the way it did, because open meeting laws, because relationships between commissioners and staff. So this gives a way to get feedback on a proposal, but also to teach about the constraints. And that's how you start to have connection between those not sitting around this table and those sitting outside, but also affected by whatever comes out at that. And so, for example, I would imagine, Sean, that you will, without us suggesting it or without it being official or me having any role, that you're going to talk to your leadership team about some of the things that come out of our discussions. That's a consultation that you do offline that I don't have to be involved with. But there may be mechanisms that I can help design. I might help facilitate. I might suggest some of you facilitate. So that's part of the process. And so I would just ask your thoughts now. What are some of the needs for reaching out beyond this room to other parts of the agency and organization in order, again, to plant the seeds of implementation as part of the process? So the ownership comes from the whole organism that is an organization.
I mean, for me, one of the questions I might have is, the five of us work together well. We work with Sean. There's kind of the next department head level. There's some key people kind of under department heads. And we engage them all. You also engage the finance staff. I engage the legal staff when we do minutes, and some other things like that. So I mean, that's a critical group to kind of talk to, but at the same time, there's got to be a conversation with the whole organization, because staff knew there was a executive session today on governance. And I guess my question would be, what do they know about what we're doing kind of behind closed doors in that process as well? So there'll be some organic touchdown within the department, but then I think we all need to think of how far we need to go for a serious contact, or just to make sure the whole team is kind of on the same page, or at least understanding what we're coming out of this with. I think that's clear.
Kind of speak to some of that process potentially.
Yeah.
So this came up, so we did an all-staff meeting on Thursday last week. I brought this up. This is happening. This is part of our work, frankly, as an organization, to acknowledge things like culture and to preserve and build and try not to take a negative tone. Instead, this is a productive exercise. Right. So this is happening, and it's been ongoing as well. And I wanted to allude to the next iteration of this project is ultimately an executive session, but it's been going on with interviews and other. This has been happening, and then also we've tested this a few times, and this is a priority of mine. I keep describing it as trying to decentralize leadership. Which is leaning heavily upon those direct reports, those 5 folks that report to me, because everybody in the agency in some way, shape, or form reports to those 5 people. And then asking them, this is your job. You manage down, so you manage your directors, you manage your managers. Share this information, but then also share it in a way that is most conducive to your teams. So for instance, Yao and Noam can't pull in every single investigator in any intimate way. It's too big. But Christine can pull legal in as a staff meeting. So how they choose to share information in the departments. So I would look at this project and say to those direct reports, here's where we're at. I'd ask you to start to cull your teams and have these, start folding these conversations into your regular check-ins with them. Observations, priorities, concerns, heartburn, whatever it might be, but raise it up through. And ultimately, I think, I'm not asking or suggesting they be that this is a table I'd like to preserve as the 6 of us, I think, need to come to alignment as the 6 of us. But it should be informed organically by those other things. And so I look at them as definitely, they're the experts as far as the culture. They can take a temperature for us, but the way I've tried to share information is really empowering that next layer, that next rung. And saying, I trust you to communicate with your teams. And that actually happened, I think, successfully with things like announcing the fact that the chair had resigned, announcing, getting additional feedback on the return to office approach, getting additional feedback on what do you want to hear in an all-staff meeting? What are your staff talking about? But it's really me trying to not have to go into those teams myself, right. Knowing that also I can cause a bit of a heartburn. If I show up in a staff meeting, staff's going to wonder, like, what happened? What news are you breaking? Whereas if Kyle hosts a staff meeting with all of his licensing staff, that's a regular occurrence. Right. So I guess that's how I want to share information down, and else we'll get it back up.
Yeah, I think that's great.
To your point, your point, Mr. Executive Director, I feel like as commissioners, we're insulated from a lot of the culture that you talk about, the hiccups in the culture, or even what can we know and what can't we know? Like, we're not supposed to know anything about an investigation. Like, I didn't know there was an incident with a driver. Should we know that? Like, what needs to come up? Like, I know you're talking this way, but like, what should commissioners know?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Your question to us, I hear you. Your question to us for this spot right now is sort of like, what are we thinking about? Who else needs to be in part of this process? Who's not here? Blah, blah, blah. This is sort of like you're just taking the temperature right now, and then we're going to keep having a larger discussion, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get your initial thoughts about how to have that happen. So we've talked now about how information gets shared down, and you're asking the question, how does it get shared up? So the kind of the more pointed question for the process is, what about sending information out that you develop? What if you have questions
that you want to pose to a particular part of the agency, right? For example, treasurer, right? I know that you're treasurer. We might get to a point where we're talking about what's the role of the treasurer? And you may want to engage some of the finance people on that particular question, right? So it's kind of fluid. We can keep it fluid and say, we're going to come to points where we think it's important to have interaction with different parts of the agency, or we can kind of right now say, we know we're going to want to do X, Y, and Z. And that's what I'm trying to get a sense of.
I would just say, and I know we're gonna go around the room or whatnot, but I'll just say for me, right now, I'm not clear on that. I know what the process is, but I think we need to figure out us first. And I'm the over communicator, right? I'm always like, let staff know that this is happening, we should let folks know, but I think that this is so sensitive and so complicated that I don't have an answer for you right now from my perspective, because I don't know yet how this ends up, or what we're doing, right now. Not that I don't know what we're doing, this is a lot, so.
Okay. And you're raising the question of timing, right? You don't have to do it, I wouldn't expect us to do outreach and consultation before the next meeting, for example, but it's not what I'm hearing from you, and I'll test with the rest of you, is keep it fluid. We understand that outreach and consultation is going to be part of the process, but we're going to make it organic. So when we have so in other words, I want to put the pin in it so that it's not at some point where I say, I'm introducing this idea, I think you really need to go talk to staff about X, and everyone's kind of like, no, we're a closed system. But just to put that out there, that this is an important component for making your charter actionable with the staff, and there may be expertise and information that they can provide for us, and we can keep it kind of organic when it makes sense to do something. But just know that there are going to be moments when you're going to want that outreach and consultation. And I would also offer that it's an opportunity to model what you want the future to look like. So that's the way to think of what the mechanisms are. How do you want it to look? Because what I find is when you change these kinds of systems, they get absorbed so fast. Like immediately that becomes the new way of doing things, because people are a little uncomfortable when it's too fluid. And so they'll immediately glom onto this new model and expect that that's the new way of doing it. So that's where you get a lot of opportunity to think about it.
One thing I think we should settle, or not settle, but I think think through too, is if there is going to be that outreach, I think we should all agree on it. In other words, I don't think I should be going to staff to solicit input, feedback, opinions. I want to make sure that you are all comfortable.
Absolutely.
I don't want to, knowing that I'm going to meet with them regularly and talk to them, I want you to be mindful or aware that I'd want to make sure that you. And I think relatedly, as you engage staff, I would just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that the right time to do that exactly, and then also what are we asking? Because I think how we pose the question can obviously yield a different answer sometimes. So I guess I'm saying, or committing, I'm not going to go into another all-staff meeting and say, all right, here's where I need everybody to align with me, and then let's march on the commission.
So the way that translates into my process mind is when I bring you a set of ground rules, that will be one of the ground rules, that outreach and consultation will occur upon agreement of all the principals as to what the timing is and what the requests are. Okay, so I just do process. I know that's kind of strange, but that's what I do, so.
I think that makes sense, and I think that's mutual, and not this is an adversarial.
I think one element that we should also be mindful of, we touched on the way that commissioners are perceived by staff. There's also this internal thing between staff and the direct reports as well. And I know that is a component when we talk about culture here at the commission, how freely information is flow through from staff to the direct reports to you and to us. There's also some tensions there that we have to recognize. So I think if there's any sort of conversations and engagement with staff, it's important that we don't only focus on the direct reports, because there are other staffers here who are not as comfortable and don't, even if they are comfortable talking to their direct reports, we don't know if that information will also be flowing. So that's just one key thing that I just wanted to put out there before we, continue.
Okay, I think I understand what you want on this component of the process. So just a summary, and then we can take a break. We talked about the assessment. The process design work plan it's one of my deliverables that I will draft, and you will help to revise. The process results we talked about will be a charter and job descriptions. I'll prepare a draft set of ground rules and send that out to you. The mediated negotiations we talked about, and the things we still need to talk about on the mediated negotiations are the scope of issues and also just logistics. Do you have a sense of how frequently you want to meet, how long you want the meetings to be?
What meetings?
Our meetings, right? So. I mean, they can be monthly, they can be bi-weekly, they can be 3 hours, they can be 8 hours.
I guess just from quick kind of today situation, obviously we had technical difficulties. I would say we should definitely meet longer. I think we should expect to be here a full day with breaks. That's just me, because I think there's so much to talk about and do.
How do others feel about having day-long meetings?
May I ask, I know it's not a set answer, but what is the anticipated timeline? Is this with your experience?
How long is
like
this gonna
3
take?
months, 6 months,
Yeah.
9 months, like your expertise?
So all of that has to do with how frequently you want to meet and how long you want to
Okay.
meet, right? So, and when we go through the issues and we see what that scope is, I'll be able to let you know that.
Okay.
And so, like the projects that I've done, when I do a project and everyone has to fly to DC, like back in prehistoric times, we would have 3-day meetings once a month. And that might be a 6-month project or 9-month project or a 3-month project. It really depends on the scope. We're a smaller group. Sometimes I have 25 people, so that takes a lot longer. But I think, part of me is like, when do you want to, if you said to me, I want this to be done in 4 months, then I would say, okay, we probably really need to meet at least twice a month for 8 hours a day. If you say 6 months, we can spread it out a little bit more. But I like the idea of long meetings, because then you're not like starting over all the time. So if people feel like they can be productive for that long, I would think that's a good idea. And then it becomes a question of how much time do we need. And there's also things happen between the meetings. So it's not just like I'm going to be preparing things. I'm going to send you things. I'll send a set of draft ground rules and I'll say, give me your comments so that I can come in with an already somewhat revised version.
We have to be mindful, like the week before a public meeting, we're all buried in public meeting. Like, so that's like off the table for us. Like we all have to immerse ourselves. So yeah, so we just, obviously you're aware, but that really takes away like a week plus for us.
I think the other piece of it too is there's a elephant in the room, right? Or a pink elephant in the room. There's a sitting chairwoman, which we're grateful for, but there's also a process right now, right? That closes on July 3rd. For anyone who's interested in being a chair or whatever happens. There's also that process, right? Like there's an uncertainty.
And someone
right?
else might be in this room.
And someone else could be in this room,
that's a
right?
good point.
Or not, right? We don't know. But I think, let's be real, like we're in a major transition at the commission. So I think, Chair Kim, whether you're here or not, I think, whatever, but I think you have a special expertise. And I think also being from the outside and coming in now, that I think it's helpful that you're here and your expertise. So I selfishly, would say, again, we don't know what's going to happen, right? You may decide to stay, you may decide to go, right? Like, let's just be honest. So it's like, if you're here, let's use your expertise. Let's use what you know as well, because you're a new person to the table and you haven't been part of all this chaos. not chaos, all this new stuff that we've dealt with in the last 16 or 17 months, right? So I think it's important to talk about that. And then, we have this conversation, there's stuff happening at the State House. If these bills pass, it's gonna be hurry up, and what are we doing at the CCC? We have two major stuff that's coming up on our agenda in terms of the DI list. We have possible regs that are opening. It's gonna take, and I'm not the ED, I'm only a commissioner, but it's gonna be a big process. So I think that it's quiet right now. I think it's a good time for us to sort of like pack it hard right now in the next few months, because it's gonna get busy and we don't know. I mean, any of us can leave, right? Like, but I say this is so key to how we continue to function, and we need to kind of, go hard on it right now. That's just my opinion. And
No,
that's,
I would.
I'm with you too.
I'm just being very honest.
Yeah, I'm willing to put in the work upfront. I totally agree with you on timing. It seems like now there's a little bit of a lull before the legislative storm.
Yeah. Not to put you on the spot, but you're our chairperson,
No,
And I think it's a really important point that it's hard to have a change of people in the middle of a process. It's a complicating factor. I mean, it happens.
And
But
as somebody who's, I don't want to say you're not vested, but we can work from your guidance, work from your participation and your expertise, and you're not teeing it up for, or maybe you are, but maybe, you're not teeing it up for, if I'm in this job, this is how I'm going to start.
Right.
You're completely kind of free of those strings somewhat. But I agree, it's kind of a,
Welcome to the hot seat.
there's, no, I mean, to your point, there's a little bit of a lull. We have some time. I would rather do longer
Where
sessions.
was the match on the car?
Apologize for kind of being a fly in the ointment today,
Yeah,
but,
right. It's real.
short of meeting week, I'm willing to, and obviously, the ED's responsibility.
And to your point, Commissioner Camargo, once the legislature acts and once we have HCA's under our purview, you're gonna be it's gonna be insane, let's be honest.
I'm really curious about this lull that you're all experiencing.
Well, it's not a lull, but it's gonna go warp speed once that, we're not responsible for the equity fund, but we are gonna be for HCA's, and that's gonna be a huge deal in this commission. And so, right, to your point, we need to put our nose to the
But
grindstone.
we will be responsible for that equity fund. You know how? Because everyone is going to expect answers from all of us.
Yes, but we're not doling out the funds.
No, but it'll still be busy. People are gonna, that's when I get in the hot seat because I'm the equity chair. People think that's only my responsibility. It's not, it's all of us. So it's gonna be, trust me, any interview you go to,
Oh, yeah, we'll be asked, yeah.
So it's gonna be busy and it's a good time. I mean, I also say selfishly, I know folks have vacations coming up and things that are happening. So I think we should probably discuss in a little bit more depth the timeline and the
That's true
schedule.
too.
Chair Kim, how long are you here for?
Unclear exactly. It's definitely until July 3rd, which is when the application period closes. So, I don't know, through the end of July at the very least, and depending on if there's a transition period necessary for whoever takes over the role, if they need, depending on where they're coming from. So I would expect definitely through the beginning of August.
That's not time. I feel like knowing that it might be a little bit unrealistic for us to try to
Jam it.
That's,
I don't
especially with public meetings.
Yeah.
Because that freaks out.
Yeah.
But do you want to meet one day a week for 3 of the weeks a month or 2 of the weeks a month? Do you want to meet 2 days a week for the second and fourth week?
I mean, I think, are there things on here that can be done and then there's a natural kind of breaking point where it would be possible for a next person to come in? Because certainly I think, when you're talking about, providing your report from different interviews and then creating the forget what you said is gonna be
The
your.
process
the
design
work plan, and then, you know, I think that there's some things that could probably be shared amongst the group, and then, you know, to the extent that I transition off, it won't have someone come in. I doubt that they would turn the whole process upside down. Is that?
Right,
That's my
fair.
impression, is that?
I think to what you're
Yeah, I
saying,
mean, I
Commissioner,
think
not packing it from you.
Yeah.
my sense is that the process design work plan, ground rules, and the scope of issues, those get done pretty quickly. And then we're kind of off to the races on the issues, and then it's just kind of going through the issues, you know, over and over until we get them. So we can kind of slow walk it until someone new is here for the issues, because that's really, or we can assume that we can also create the system that we have a new person walk into.
I mean, it sounds like we have a little bit of time, right? So we have the month of June, well, this is just almost, this is over. We have a week, and we have 4th of July. And then July 9th or something, we're getting ready for our public meeting, pretty much. And then July 14th is our public meeting. We're all dead on July 15th. And then the week after,
The week after, I'm gone.
you're
And
gone
I'm
on
gone the first
vacation.
week of July, I'm on vacation the first week of July, like
Yeah.
July 6th, so everybody's
So
vacation.
vacation, actual
Pre-booked.
vacation, which
Yeah.
means the first week of July, you're gone.
July 6th, I'm gone that
I'm
week.
gone the week after public meeting.
So that means we're now looking at the 4th week of July to
Yeah.
kind of come in person. So it could be, that could be the next time that we come in person.
Right.
The 4th week of July.
Right, that's right.
And then I think I'm gone the first week or second week, maybe 2 weeks of August.
For you.
Yeah, maybe, but probably.
Okay, so I think
In
that,
September.
I think that we can have, Grace has been really helpful in scheduling. I think the question is, what do we want to schedule? Do we want to schedule full day meetings when schedules allow for that? Do we want to schedule, like, do we want to, yeah.
I mean, can I say, something? I feel like I'm like hardcore here, like on the field. I'm like, come on, let's go for it. I personally, I would say it would be nice to kind of block off 2 days, you know, from our calendar after everything, after vacation, before vacation, kind of just come in here for two days, maybe 3, and work out throughout the day. It's been 17 months, we have not been able to do this.
That's right.
You know, so I don't know, I'm willing to do it because nothing else is more important than this. So that's just my recommendation or opinion, so.
Yeah, I'm willing,
Yeah.
I think it's more engaging to keep you on the right track and more elongated conversations if we can swing that. I'm all for doing it as well.
I think there might be, and I'll speak for myself, ongoing projects that I know I will have to pause or at least slow down too. And I know that, you know, we're starting to have these regs conversations too.
Right.
There's going to have to be something has to slow down in order for us to focus completely on this and give it the attention that it needs as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that.
No, it's so
I'm
true.
also glad this is one of my goals.
Check.
Well, yeah, if nothing else, there's sympathy in the room for like, hey, I've made some headway on this goal, but because of that headway, maybe this one isn't as, hasn't seen the progress. And I would just say for myself, I think devoting a full day or several is gonna be a lot easier, just because of the mental juggling. Like I can put myself in the headspace for this. It's harder to do it for 3 hours and then jump right back into, okay, what else is on fire today?
That's true.
I can carve out a day, but also prepare for that and come ready to dive into this versus like start and stop.
And as of right now, think about it, we can't come together in person until the last week of July.
Yeah.
So we're about to have a month break before we come together for 2 or 3 days to talk about this.
So what if we ask Grace to find any days that everyone's available for 6 to 8 hours? And then just see how many days that gives us over the next 3 months and see where we are. And just ask her to grab all of those, and then if we don't need them, everyone always, it's always nice to have an extra day.
And I think as long as all of us are flexible on that too, like she will know and I will share with her, like, reschedule, whatever you need, like to accommodate. If there's a day where I've got 2 random meetings, like, this is a priority.
Because what did they say? It's like herding cats.
Yeah.
Right? We all have busy schedules.
You look at my
schedules,
schedule, it's gonna be
right?
something on every day.
Exactly.
But it's-
I was
it
gonna
should be
say,
flexible.
bust out your phones right now, but I'm not the facilitator. Susan, what about you? Are you going on vacation?
Last 2 weeks in August.
Okay, so you're the last week's in August.
Yeah.
And then last week's in August.
I'm gonna take a week in August, so maybe what week are you, maybe I'll do the same week as you. What week are you?
Well, I'm taking a week in July. I'm seeing family in Puerto Rico, so that's the 15th. That's
Okay,
the Friday after our meeting, and then I
Okay.
come back the following Wednesday, and then we have the research symposium that Friday. And then August is my wedding anniversary, so we might just have like a day or two, but
happy.
I will coordinate, I will clear things that can be cleared. It's not already scheduled, so don't
Yeah.
worry about
And
it.
your August first 2 weeks?
Yeah, I kind of want to go away for 2 weeks in August.
So August, then if your first 2, your last 2.
But again, to be honest with you, like, I can switch things around right now, but
Right.
yeah. Sean, are you going on vacation?
That same
Oh,
week,
Same week.
after the public meeting,
Yeah, I've been pushing Sean to take a vacation.
July.
Of July.
Okay, so yeah, so the first time is the end of.
Because I'll try to
All right.
coincide my vacation with like when you guys
Sorry,
are
sorry.
gone.
All right, we're just gonna take a 5-minute break,
Yeah.
and then we come back, we're gonna look at the issues list. And
Should we
see,
bring our food here and eat, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
bring your food here, and we'll see how far we can get to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
issues list of what's in and what's out.
Susan, thank you for allowing us to even talk like this because.
We don't get this out.
We don't.
Yeah.
Even out
Wow.
loud, can
Even
you
out
tell,
loud.
or like?
I can't tell you how,
Yeah.
I was looking forward to this, because I knew how.
This is a big deal, like,
How nice that was gonna be.
Even us talking about the dates, because otherwise our admins are doing it for us and we're not in the conversation.
exactly. This is kind of a big deal.
Did you see?
It's like other people are making decisions.
I think we're getting some.
All right, let's take a bio break.
Get my food.
Sabio, we're taking a break. We hope you will too.
Because you're gonna wanna talk about the issues, but, and we may need to talk some about them, but really what we want, is it yes or no? Is it in our scope or is it not in our scope? And some things won't be so clear, so we'll need to talk about them, but if it's easily on, if we could, let's get as far through this list about what's on and what's not. That would take us forward.
Sabio.
Is he on?
We're still recording.
Sabio, are you with us?
I am, yes. I just started the recording recently, so.
Okay. Does anyone need a copy of I've got an extra here if somebody needs it. Does everyone have a copy? Okay, great. So I just put this background up here because I heard it from so many of you. The mission is to safely, securely, and equitably regulate the cannabis industry. And then I heard a lot about the conflict between these two authorities, that the commission chair shall have and exercise supervision and control over all the affairs of a commission, and the executive director shall be the executive and administrative head of the commission and shall be responsible for administering and enforcing the law relative to the commission and to each administrative unit thereof. So I know that that's kind of, that creates a lot of gray areas that have led to tensions and conflict. So I just thought I'd put it there. And I also know that there's been a delegation of authorities. So that was just kind of background. And then just put in the clause on finance, because I know that's been a question. No funds shall be transferred by the commission without the approval of the commission and the signatures of the chief financial and accounting officer and the treasurer of the commission. And I know there have been questions about both treasurer and secretary. What are the roles? Okay, so taking us to where it says draft list of issues. First is roles and responsibilities of the commission chair, executive director, commissioners, the seats within which people are appointed, and then the named functions of treasurer and secretary. Is that on?
Yes.
Yes.
And then the advisory board, should that also be mentioned in the charter?
I don't think so,
No? Okay.
at least from a
Others?
day-to-day standpoint. I mean,
Do they get unruly? Do they kind of, they leak stuff? We know that, they just leak stuff.
but how do we govern them?
Yeah, we don't have authority over them. I mean, they're established under the law.
The law.
I mean, we can talk about our own interactions with the advisory board.
Right.
But we cannot talk about sort of their,
Roles and responsibilities.
exactly.
Okay.
I would describe them as an entirely separate entity.
As, I didn't hear?
An entirely separate entity unto
Okay.
themselves. Their connections, they advise the commission, but I chair it, but beyond that, I don't control it.
Okay. So is there anyone who doesn't agree with removing it from the scope of issues? Remove, so I just cross out.
Narrow
advisory board.
I don't think you should remove it. I think that it should be included in the description of sort of our functionality, because that's been another component of our interaction with them has not been, at least what I think is the intention behind the law.
So it's not the roles and responsibilities of the advisory board?
No.
It is?
Our interaction with them.
Okay.
I mean, you guys, I'm open, throwing it out
I would
there.
agree with that.
Mhm.
And of course,
Okay.
we would have to bring them into the conversation, and that seems like a whole other.
So that'll be another role and responsibility of the commissioners, which is how they interact. Okay. Another thing under roles and responsibilities is decision-making.
I'm sorry, and the executive director, because your role with the advisory board is the chair of the advisory board. You know.
Okay, thank you.
We chair we're liaisons on subcommittees.
Mhm.
Right. All right, decision-making. And I feel like this is gonna be complicated because it's who for what issues, what activities, and then communication of, right? Because it's a big topic, we have to talk about it, but it's gonna be different for different issues, right? Okay.
So for this, is this point going to be informed by the delegation of authorities document that's already in existence?
It should.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
So on this point, the decision-making, yes, I think it should be included here, but I guess, so in anticipating the next step and Susan not adhering to your initial admonition, I think the decision-making, this piece is informed by the delegation of authorities document that is already in existence.
And then emergency actions and the transition from emergency to ordinary.
Could we think about the scope of that? I think in practice, for instance, it may not be an emergency action as much as it is, say, for instance, an administrative order, which could be a routine matter, or say, for instance, a industry bulletin FAQ versus guidance. Industry bulletin FAQ can be administrative, guidance is a formal vote and interpretation of the commission. Where is that line drawn? So emergency could be one context, but I don't think it's the full scope necessarily.
It's not broad enough to cover.
Exactly.
And so you prefer that it say administrative order and industry bulletin guidance?
Yeah.
And is that vis-a-vis emergency actions, or emergency actions doesn't need to be,
I think emergency actions could be included in that.
for example?
Exactly.
Okay.
Susan, this is just an outline, but I'm assuming where it says for what issues and activities, there's a lot of issues and activities under that. Right, okay.
Okay, so anything else that needs to be under roles and responsibilities?
Sean, I'm just thinking right now, the document that we approved for you a few months ago in terms of the dividing of powers or decision-making powers, remember that?
The delegation.
The delegation, yeah. Is that included in here?
Yeah, I think we referenced in the decision-making context, right?
Yeah, the governance authorities is also there.
I just have a question. If this is ultimately going in a charter, why do we stop at commissioners? Why can't we include department heads? So they have clarity.
What do you mean?
So the roles and responsibilities of the chair, the executive director, the commissioners. And, like in the department heads, like I know they have the direct reports, but. All right, I'll just, this is honest conversation, right?
Being
So-
recorded.
Being recorded. So if I asked to have, I had a question for, someone in licensing, and then the department head says no. They can stop a commissioner from asking a question, like, not to impede with an investigation, nothing like that. So their authority goes that way, where they can stop us from interacting with the staff.
So you're saying to put sort of, to add in here, leadership, to understand their roles and responsibilities as it relates to us commissioners?
I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there
Oh, yeah,
for
yeah.
conversation.
There's another section that's commissioners, staff, ED, leadership team interactions.
Oh, on the next page.
But that doesn't outline their roles and responsibilities, so that's the question on the table. Should the department head's roles and responsibilities be listed in the charter?
Isn't this for them too? This is a document, not just for the whole commission, like it's.
I feel, if I can offer my opinion, I think this goes into the overall reasoning behind this conversation and the process to begin with, because that is something that technically, this is only from my perspective, would be under our executive director's role and the way that he compiles and leads the staff. So that kind of goes directly back into
Okay.
where are we, and then where's our executive director, and who has authority to what within, with staff and leadership.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I'm just throwing that out there, that's.
Right.
No, I think it's a great point. I think it might fold into the communications part of it. I think to your point, we bump up against the tension that we're trying to solve. And everything that we list in terms of draft list of, roles and responsibilities, all that's laid out in the statute. These positions have been kind of created by, they don't have any statutory authority. They've been created by you in terms of how we wanted to set up, allow the agency to function. So, but I kind of hear, I understand kind of the bump you're trying to
I
solve.
get that too. And I think just to build on what you're saying too, this is also what's crossed my mind, is that we're creating something that is to live beyond us, and what the commission currently is, what it currently consists of. We don't know what staff or what leadership looks like or what those roles may be, but we know that by law, we have these 5 commissioners, we have the chair, we have this, we have the executive director. That's something that, unless the legislature and the government, whatever, decides to change the composition of the commission, that's something that will continue on.
So I guess my point, to your point, was the tension, you talked about that tension, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we address that tension? And like you said, to give him more power or define his role will give him more, I don't know, authority, I don't know the right word, but like, so with the department heads.
I should rephrase that. It's in his job description. That's what I was trying to say. It's within,
Okay.
at least when I read the description that was used when Sean was hired, and one of those things within the description was about getting staff, hiring staff, and organizing, staff. That was just within the description itself.
His job description.
You can correct me, Sean. You tell us what your.
Hiring's also been formally delegated, but with the caveat that I can come back to the commission. So that, I think, is a good example of governance finding its way organically to work without a formal approach is we muddled our way through it because that was actually at one point a real debate over
Oh, us.
we, the commission, will hire the general counsel, the CFO. I just survived the round of public interviews. Your candidate pool is going to just dwindle. If that's
Definitely.
So that it became this, what we hired. So we ended up with an arrangement, which was, I will hire, but I'll bring you every job that I create, that I want to create. You will explicitly approve it. I'll ask you to approve it. That way you have a fingerprint on what this agency looks like, and I'm accountable to you in creating roles. Also around spending too. Did we budget for this?
Right.
What is our plan? But I am hearing you as far as how do we manage the staff interactions and
In a
responsiveness?
positive way, right, it benefits all.
So, but thinking about it in the context of roles and responsibilities and the list of issues, I think it could be, I view the roles and responsibilities ultimately on the list of issues potentially just being the formal descriptions of who does what. Less so the interactions in between those, I guess, further down. So I don't know how
Can
to,
I rephrase it? Do they see their roles as gatekeepers? So if we want to meet with their staff, we don't know their bandwidth, like, in other words, like, for them to say, no, you cannot meet with a commissioner, that's like a gatekeeper. Is that a policy here?
not in any written way. I think it's, and it's going to unfortunately be a case-by-case instance where, because I think to your point, if it's about, I heard about this investigation, I want to talk about it, the answer is probably going to be no.
That's right.
So in that sense, they are the gatekeepers.
Right.
And more formally, they're a firewall. I think thereby trying to insulate and protect, sounds good, protect commissioners, protect the process ultimately. But if it's about a specific question, I would ask them and I would expect them to exercise judgment as far as, how do I answer this? Who has this answer? And the other thing that I think is an actual policy, an explicit policy, is if we share information with one commissioner, we share with every commissioner. And that's
Is that
actually
happening now?
I'm going to interrupt because we're going to go through these issues.
Oh, okay.
Right, but I have a potential solution to this, which is, would it make sense when we do roles and responsibilities for the executive director to include something about managing staff commissioner interactions? That would be part of your roles and responsibilities, and then it will be further outlined in the section on interactions. Does that make sense?
I believe that's what Commissioner Concepcion was saying, yeah.
I agree with that.
And can I ask prior question? So on these drafts of issues, are these the issues that are, and topics that we have been going into a charter and or job descriptions? Okay.
So this is basically what we're going to talk through and write up. And not necessarily in this order, but yeah, we're trying to basically say, as I always say, what do we have to talk about and agree to, and then we can all go home.
Okay.
Is this what you got from our individual meetings?
Yeah, that's sort of a synthesis of what I heard from everyone. Yeah.
And I think though, at least on the charter, it's easy to kind of get pulled into the weeds on certain things, but I do think the charter should be high level, general principles. And so, I know we have a lot of things that are percolating around, but yeah, just one thing that I'm certainly going to try to keep in my mind is, all right, charter, high level, job descriptions, maybe a little bit more, or at least commissioner job descriptions.
Okay. And I think you're right. I think one of the challenges is going to be the appropriate level of detail. And I think that's why it will be helpful to pass out this charter so that people have a sense of what it is. Okay. All right. Anything else under the list of roles and responsibilities? Okay.
Just
Yep.
appointing authorities are appointing authorities. Just throwing it out there. What is their role and responsibility to the commission as us appointed commissioners? at a high level, but since we have a list, I would say, I would just be curious to talk about that when we can talk about that.
That's a good point.
So we'll put it on the list, and if it's on the list, there may be a point where you have the discussion and say, we don't need this in our charter, or we do. So this becomes a list that is also not getting.
I think folks know where I'm coming from, but if not, it's, who manages us, right? Besides Sean, but who reprimands us? And when does that happen, or, or how does that work? I don't think we've ever, we've never had that conversation, right? Like, who says you're fired?
Right.
And lock her for what?
Yeah, and I
Or
heard
turn
that from
Yeah.
people. Let me just see, there's.
Well, that's in the statute.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a section further down on accountability, checks and balances.
Yeah.
It's removal of a commissioner.
Yeah.
That's the topic that I heard some people mention.
I'll raise it when we get there, but I think what's just before that
Right.
is a question for me.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think under the rules and responsibilities, just a note, I don't, I think we should be a little bit cautious about putting too many restraints on the roles of commissioners as well, and maintaining sort of some broadness in that. That's just a note.
Yeah.
Like, if this is something that's supposed to be like a document, something that's continued on, then
High level.
yeah.
Very high level, not very,
Yeah.
because this isn't a 9 to 5 job. It's like, there's nights I'm reading, doing research or whatever, or, I was in Gloucester, it took me 2.5 hours to get home the other day. Like, it's not a 9 to 5 desk job, so we can't
Yeah.
box it in that way, to your point, right?
All right, and again, if you have more thoughts, like you go home and say, oh, I should have said that, just email me, okay? And we'll put that up for discussion. I called it regulation of industry, just to separate that out from the regulations that creates the commission. And so, just again, I heard a lot of this about promulgating regulations, about implementing them, evaluating them, a review of regulations, and revisions of identifying needs for changes to existing process timing.
Can I add to that list? So in that order, I think interpretation is also one that we experience.
Implementation on twice. Approval on. Implementation is the second item and then the last item.
Okay, so it should come off.
Well, it says approval of implementation.
Is it approval of implementation or?
Yeah, I think I see it has implementation needs and then, okay, I'll just take that second implementation off. We'll get at all the regulatory, yeah. We'll get at all of that. Any other thoughts about this? This is, I just want to call your attention to the revisions of the decision to revise. And what I tried to do here is break out required revisions because there's new legislation versus decision to change them because there are different needs that have arisen.
Should we just add for legacy purposes legislative outreach? Like, just because it's working well, we all agreed on it, just put it in writing? Or is that down the road? Did I miss it somewhere?
There's at the bottom of page 2.
Okay, legislation, okay.
I'm just gonna throw this out. I'm a little confused by this section, the regulation of industry. Is this an identified issue that we're having?
So here's what I heard from sort of just to synthesize what I heard that we need to promulgate regulations to regulate the industry, that there are existing regulations, those are getting implemented, how do they get evaluated? And then at some points, there's a review of the existing regulations, and there are questions and decisions, do we revise the regulations? So then the second chunk is, okay, when there's a need to revise the regulations, how does that process happen? Both in terms of identifying needs for new regulations, changes to existing regulations, what's the process for that and what's the timing? And so what I
heard that sometimes the decision to revise or create new regulations is necessary because there's new legislation and something new is going to need to be done and you need regulations for that. Sometimes the decision to revise is because the way they're being implemented is missing some things. And so you want to change the regulations because they're not adequate. Sometimes there's a desire to change regulations because preferences have changed.
So I guess I'll kind of rephrase what I'm
Okay,
asking.
maybe I
Is
misunderstood.
this is an issue that we're hoping to resolve by this governance process? Because I'm asking that because I know
Okay.
we've kind of gone through this process with the commission and with staff here about our regulatory process. We've gone through that whole rollout. That's like a conversation that was had. I just don't know. It's just new to me. I didn't know that this is
Okay.
something that is coming into the governance conversation.
The question of whether it does is on the table. If it's just an issue that kept coming up in my conversations. So if that's already been done and there's a document, then we can take it off our scope.
I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know, so.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What specifically are you asking
Is this something we're covering in this process?
of the legislative process or just the?
Governance, in this governance process, this is a list of issues that we hope to resolve within our time here.
But in this little section here,
Yeah, the regs.
So I think
that wasn't clear.
it sounds like you've gone through this process of how to actually do the regulatory review. Perhaps just in the charter, then there's a reference to the fact that, you know, part of our obligation is to do this regulatory review, see document called blah, blah, blah for actually how it's done. Is that?
So that makes sense. I'm throwing it out because this is
Yeah,
my,
yeah.
I don't understand.
yeah.
What it, you know.
So I know we're not supposed to wade into this yet, but I think in order to solve for whether or not it should be in here, we may have to
Talk about it.
Got it?
pinky toe into it.
Yeah.
I think-
Okay,
I
yeah,
need to dip my
that's
toe.
okay,
That's
do
your
do
point.
that, yeah.
Just to settle, like,
Yeah.
should this be here or not?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I would argue vehemently that the process we just went through should never be the process we engage in again, which is that conversation lingered for months and months and months and months with this looming threat of, and I will just reference specifically, I am the chair, I will assign it, and I will do it if I have to or if I want to. And I don't therefore know that it should be captured in a governance document, because to be honest, any one of you at any time can raise a regulation and bring it to a commission meeting and promulgate it when you see fit. And your obligation though is to convince two of your colleagues to agree with you.
That's right.
So, and I kept returning to that process saying, it's your right as a regulator to regulate. There is no defined process. There also is no defined trigger. You could look at a regulation and say this should be modified. It could be as simple as may to shall.
Yeah.
That's your right. You could raise it at the July meeting. You could raise it at the August meeting. I think if you set a process, the challenge you're going to run into is that you're then obligated to adhere to it, at least perhaps morally, or make an argument as to why you're violating that process. But I think given that we just went through a bit of an exercise, that captivated energy of this agency, unfortunately, for months.
Yeah.
And just loomed. But it was a looming threat as well.
So the rub was, it's taking too long, like, explain the whole rub.
The rub was one commissioner wanted to get into regulations. And that commissioner enjoyed an outsized role in setting an agenda and kept saying, I want it to happen. And I want you as my colleagues, fellow commissioners, to come along with me in this exercise. But if you don't, I will force it. And the force would have been attempting, actually would have triggered a governance debate live of you can't force me. I manage the staff, not you. So that actually became arguments, like real shouting arguments, but also loomed over setting agendas. This will be on the next commission agenda. And I think a lot of you probably recall, it would be on the agenda until the very last iteration and then come off.
Yes.
And then it would be on the next agenda until the very last iteration and then come off.
Right.
As pressure. And I think setting a process and governance, unless, and that might get back to Commissioner Camargo, your earlier point, any future commission could just simply say, yeah, that's not our process. We're not gonna handcuff ourselves into unless legislation comes through, we're not gonna regulate. No, you can regulate whatever you want.
And so is the idea here to create the process and govern, that's
That's
what I'm
what I'm
trying to figure
trying to get
out.
at.
What are we trying to do with our regulatory, like with our regs and
In
what
this
are we,
document.
yeah, what are we trying to?
In fact, this might be a solution, so I'm channeling you. It might fit better into roles and responsibilities. It's the role of a commissioner to regulate. It is the role of staff to implement.
Yeah.
Right, and for a process on doing the regulatory review, see document called, I
Yeah.
assume what you came, resulted from this, what you're talking about, is
It
a
was a-
document that
No,
outlines the process, there's no document?
No, that was your point. There was no
Oh,
process.
Okay.
it came
That's
through.
process before, and that was because I said that there was no
Yeah, there was no
process,
process.
it needed to be
I,
created.
honestly, I feel like this is why we're in this room. This was a big part of the rub. This whole, how many months did this linger on and how bad a rub was it? And I feel like
5
this is.
years.
Nobody.
So I don't think the process for doing a regulatory review should be in the charter.
That's what I'm
That should
trying
be
to
a
figure out.
separate
That's what I'm
document. There
saying.
should just
I'm trying to
be,
see.
you know, the commission reviews and issues regulations, period. See SOP 1000.1 or whatever we want to call it for the actual how to do it.
And I think we've now done regulations, I think, 4 times. We've never had a single process. It's changed every time. The first time, I think in fairness to process was, okay, we're 5 commissioners, we just got hired, we have to do regulations by Christmas Eve.
Right. That's
Okay,
fine.
So our process is like just blitz.
All hands on deck.
Exactly. Medical was, we have a deadline looming, we're lifting and shifting, so that's a different exercise. Everything else since then has been, let's try this. Does this work? And I think even embarking on a round that we're considering now is similar of, let's pick and pull what we liked about the last round. But we're also in the middle right now of conducting a survey of the staff that worked on it
Right.
and asking them, what did you like, what didn't you like? Which also reveals that we don't have a process therefore.
Right.
And even if we went through the next round, we would still ask that question at the end of, did this work? What did you think of it? Did you find that you were engaged enough? Or did staff take too much? And I think that's where I'm not frankly arguing from the role that I occupy, it's instead thinking about the best interests of the agency. I don't know where the right divide is.
Can I ask a point of clarification?
Yeah.
Because I know, Bruce, you're leaving at 2:30.
Yeah, and by the way, I have enough confidence in the 5 of you that I will be leaving behind, but I really don't want to miss this event for my daughter. I'm happy just to excuse myself and allow you all to continue the conversation. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, we set the meeting for to end at 2:30, and I'd like to end on time, but if we could go for another 15 minutes just to try and get through this list, that would help us a lot.
Get through the whole list. You call in from the drive.
In terms
Some of
of,
the link. How far is your drive? You can call it.
or we can stop and just pick up where we left off.
My
There's
daughter's
a lot.
giving a speech at a big education.
Yeah,
Okay, so we'll stop. Let's just try and get closure on this regulatory question. I think what I'm hearing is it's a need of the overall commission, but maybe not in this governance document.
I think Sean also hit something that the core of it is not about our regulatory process, it's about the dynamics that were created from the threat of regs and from the chair also trying to use his role to force action. So how do we say, maybe we have something incorporated where we're saying the only way for a regulatory change, we have this in writing, is that you have a majority in agreement, boom. And this is what needs to happen before anything else can happen. So we avoid a situation where we have any chair coming in and saying, bump whatever you're saying, bump everyone else, I'm gonna do what I feel like doing.
That's right.
So maybe that's
You're right.
something like that.
That's the point of clarification that we've been kind of going around, but
Good use of Robert's rules.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. How many hours did you spend on that topic with him?
I don't even want to comment.
Yeah.
I just want to get into Bruce gotta go.
Yeah,
So it sounds like
there's going to be kind of a general roles and responsibilities of the commission, and in that could be when 3 of the 5 commissioners agree to change regulations. They
Call it how to reg Y, the CCC.
And I think that's true of any
For now.
business, right? Like that's consistent with statute, frankly, is official business of the agency or the commission is conducted. It's for 3 commissioners. That's simple.
Yeah, I forgot how bad that was actually, Sean. That was.
All right,
I won't.
we've got 2 minutes.
He's having a
So I just want to go
Yeah.
over next steps, what's going to happen between now and the next meeting. First off, I'll send an email to Grace and ask her to grab whatever full days there are or close to full days. And if you can all let your admins know to be flexible, that'll make Grace's life easier. I'm going to complete the assessment, which means I'm going to finish all the interviews with the department heads. And then I will finalize the synthesis of findings. I'm going to give you kind of an oral report out on the dynamics instead of creating a document. Okay, so it'll just be an oral thing. I'm going to revise the scope of issues, the first page, because that's what we got through. I'm going to send you draft ground rules and ask you to give me comments on them. And I'm going to draft a process design work plan and also ask you to give me comments on. Now, I'll have to get some help understanding what the open meeting laws are. Like, is it possible to use a Google Doc and let everybody put their suggestions on it? Is that?
Yeah.
No? Okay. So I'll ask each of you to send me your feedback, and then I'll create a master revised version.
So as a rule, when they send stuff out, they'll be CCS because we can't hit reply all. So
Right,
you have to avoid us hitting reply all,
right.
right?
What I don't know is the open meeting laws have a complete exemption for mediation. And I don't know what that means in terms of document management. So let me find out about that. And then we'll clearly abide by the open meeting laws. But if we have some flexibility on that, we'll make use of that as well. So at our next meeting, we're going to go over the issues, complete the issues, we'll finalize ground rules, hopefully finalize the scope of issues and the work plan. And I'll do a report out of the assessment dynamics, and then we'll begin to workshop the issues. Okay?
Sounds good, okay.
All right. Well, thank you, and I will look forward to seeing everybody again, when that will be, who knows?
Do I need to motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Any objections? Seconded by Mr. Kamaga. Just for the record, Commissioner Stebbins made the motion to adjourn. Commissioner Kamaga seconded. There are no objections. And roll call, Commissioner Stebbins.
Aye.
Commissioner Roy. Aye. Commissioner Carmago. Aye. Commissioner Concepcion. Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We're adjourned.